Good evening. Welcome to the Who's Left Podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from an unapologetically leftist perspective. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I am broadcasting from Bloomington. You know, in the 3.5 years I've been doing this podcast, I am grateful for all of the guests who have granted me some of their time, for the knowledge they've shared with us, and for the legitimacy they've lent our platform. But I'm especially grateful for those who were here with us in the very beginning. And one of my earliest guests makes a return appearance this evening to revisit a problem that has only grown since we first talked about it. Dr. David Sanders is a biology professor at Purdue, longtime West Lafayette City Council person, multiple-time congressional candidate, and he's currently running for state senate in District 23. He first appeared on the Who's Left podcast all the way back in episode 2, and then again at the very beginning of 2024 when we discussed the Indiana Economic Development Corporation's LEAP Innovation District in Boone County and their plans to pipe water from his area to supply the massive development. Dr. Sanders was one of the leaders pushing back against that plan, and while the IEDC backed down on their proposal to steal water from Tippecanoe County, the resource-hungry private corporations taking up residence at LEAP still needed millions of gallons of water, which they're now looking to take from Eagle Creek Reservoir in Indianapolis. And the Wabash River aquifers still aren't out of the woods, with a massive semiconductor manufacturer slated to set up shop in a residential West Lafayette neighborhood with water demands of their own. We'll talk about all of that and more. But first, this is an independent media project. We don't paywall content. We don't charge candidates for interviews, and we certainly don't have billionaire benefactors. Only individuals like you keep this thing going. It is a foundational principle of Who's Left and the Progressive Indiana Network that we refuse to hide important information behind paywalls in the middle of a political crisis, even to our financial detriment. So please, if you find value in this work, go to progressiveindiana.net and subscribe at the paid level. It's only $5 a month or $50 a year to help us build the infrastructure that will pop the right-wing media bubble in this state. And while a paid subscription is the best way to help us grow and sustain this project, you can help in other ways by liking and sharing on social media, commenting, leaving reviews, providing feedback, and forwarding our content to your people. You get us when you can. Mostly, we just want you here in this community of Hoosiers dedicated to making this state and its government work for all of us, not just the elite few. Please join us. You can follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads at whosleft.us, and on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube at Who's Left. That's HOOS Left. Progressive Indiana Network's handle is the full spelled out name on most sites, but on Blue Sky and TikTok, it is PIN Indiana. Please help us grow with a follow wherever you're at. Tell the others. Let's build a radically democratic Indiana together. Now, let's give a warm welcome to the man, the myth, the hat, Dr. David Sanders. Doc, welcome back to the Who's Left podcast. It's been far too long.
I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak with you again.
I wish we could say things were in a better place than when we last talked, and in some regards they are, in other regards maybe not as much. We'll talk about the LEAP development and the water situation and the semiconductor manufacturer coming to West Lafayette, all of those in just a second. But first, for the folks who don't know you, introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm David Sanders. I'm the Democratic candidate for State Senate in District 23. I have been teaching at Purdue University in the Department of Biological Sciences for 30 years. I work on how viruses get into cells. I've worked on the Ebola virus, which seems to be in the news once again. I have a couple of patents on gene therapy vectors. I worked for a while with, everybody needs their seatbelts on for this, the United States Defense Threat Reduction Agency Biological Weapons Proliferation Prevention Program. And in that capacity, I traveled to a formerly secret bioweapons lab in Siberia. It has the James Bondish name Vector. And it was a place where they were in the Cold War trying to turn viruses such as Ebola and Marburg and Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus into biological weapons. And it's one of the two places on the planet that still has smallpox virus. So we were trying to work with the scientists there to try to use their skills to keep them gainfully employed so they wouldn't go to what we were supposed to refer to, this is State Department speak, third nations, which at the time was Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, and subnational actors. Subnational actors, I always thought were people who participated in regional theater, but subnational actors is euphemism for terrorists. And we worked on that, and it was a successful program for a while until Putin really started. The lights have turned off here.
You're going dark on me there, Doc. Oh, and we're back.
It's a motion sensitive lighting system, so I guess I need to move around.
Be more dramatic. With you.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. In any case, it was a successful program, but eventually Putin, as he consolidated power, withdrew from this program, which is actually an outgrowth of the Nunn Lugar, our own Senator Lugar, a cooperative threat reduction program. So I have that experience, and I'd like to just comment briefly about Ebola, since it's in the.
I meant to ask you about the Ebola.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can cover. Then I'll let that go for just a second. But I have been a West Lafayette City Councilor for 10 years, and I've worked on issues, for example, to try to stop government surveillance and the use of surveillance data that governments acquire by private companies, which is what happens too often. I've worked on environmental issues. I've worked on making sure that the international community, which is very prominent in West Lafayette, sees West Lafayette as a welcoming community. I've worked on, many other, issues of trails, bicycles, just trying to make West Lafayette a more, welcoming, well-rounded community, so that it serves all of its people and embraces its diversity.
Very good. Lots of stuff there. And, we're going to hear more about you here on Progressive Indiana Network over the course of the summer. I believe Derek Holder's supposed to host you for a more of a proper, candidate policy interview later on as we get closer to the general election. But, here we're largely going to focus on the LEAP district and the water issue and data centers, which, we sort of picking back up where we left off at the beginning of 2024. And, there's been a lot of developments in that. But first, because it's in the news, I did want to ask you about this Ebola thing. You've done research in that area. Should we be worried?
So should we be worried? And the answer is not as individuals. The chance of an individual in the United States acquiring Ebola is extremely, extremely low. The major danger would be to hospital workers who were exposed to a patient. And we saw that in 2014. And just three quick comments. Number one is I've actually been, I was working on Ebola before 9/11. There was practically nobody in the country working on it. And I was interested in a particular hypothesis about that. I had a graduate student who was gung-ho about, working on that particular project, and he really did a terrific job with it. And so we made some, important findings about how Ebola gets into cells. But because of that expertise, when in 2014, they had the infection that occurred in Dallas of the nurses there, I was contacted, and it's a very interesting story. And I'm sharing it with you because you can have an impact. That's the message here. So I was woken up by some press person at Purdue at 5:00. It says, CNN wants you on TV. It was through Skype in those days, at 6 a.m. So I said, okay, fine. I roll out, get it 6 o'clock. They tell me what happened. I don't know all the facts. So I said, listen, the message that we're receiving is every hospital in America should be prepared to treat an Ebola case. And I say, I disagree. Every hospital in America should be able to recognize one, but once it's recognized, the person should be transferred to a regional center that is specialized in this, because use of the personal protection equipment is really tricky. And I've seen trials where people do it, and inevitably people, even if you're just using red dye, that it'll get on your clothing. It will get people just putting it on, taking it off. It doesn't. You really have to be well trained. It's all about the training. And okay, CNN. This is the way CNN operates. I come on at 6:30 again, but first they've got a physician now, and he's there in his white coat, and he says every hospital in America should be able to treat an Ebola case. And I said, I beg to differ. I think that it should be regional centers. 7 o'clock. He goes first. I believe that we should focus our efforts on regional centers for treating Ebola cases. And I'm sitting there with my, I don't know, but maybe my jaw was hanging down. And I said, yes, I agree with that. The reason I'm telling you that story is that policy was in fact adopted by the United States. And as far as I know, it was the first person who was publicly advocating it. And it was against what the CDC was recommending, but they changed it. They listened. That's the most important part of this. They listened because they made a convincing argument. And that's actually in place to this day. We have those centers that we can potentially bring patients to, Americans in particular, to, instead of, this idea of having in Kenya, which is really disturbing the local population there. We've seen protests, and there have been violence at some of these protests. So we have the infrastructure here, and I believe I played a small part in advocating for that. And I use it as an illustration of the fact that having scientific knowledge in a legislator can actually help produce actual results, productive outcomes. And that's one of the things that I hope to be able to bring to the state Senate.
And this current administration, with RFK at the helm of HHS, has very much become sort of an anti-science administration. How big of a deal is it that we've largely pulled back from the world stage on things like the Ebola research and being over there to get early warning signs and such?
I think it's a tremendous issue. I also 2014 was advocating for more international cooperation. And even after the pandemic passed, took quite some time. A lot of it was the largest outbreak that's been recorded. But I said that we had to stay engaged. And one of the ways to stay engaged was to build the infrastructure in those countries in order to make sure that they had the capacity to deal with these cases in a way where hospital workers wouldn't be endangered, for example. And that's something which we did not do. And recently we've pulled away from our responsibilities. I started off by saying that you as an individual, there's not that much risk, but pandemics can get out of control, and we need to be always prepared. You should use each one of these episodes as a training exercise for preparation. And we do have to realize that in terms of health, we are all in this together with travel, with the large increase in world population, the density of population around the world. We need to understand that we are in this together. We need to see public health as a global issue, and that we need to focus on the public part of public health. It's not just about individuals. It really is a societal issue.
Yeah, and boy, we could spend the whole hour talking about this, but I guess let's move from the public health emergency over there to what could become a public health emergency over here. We're talking about our water, and water is life. and we've got economic developments that are very water hungry taking place in central Indiana, which doesn't have the best water infrastructure in the first place. And now, we talked about LEAP a couple years ago now, and they first started, putting this thing in, and it's in the middle of Boone County near Lebanon. Not a lot of water nearby. I don't think they thought of this when they were planning it. And then, they get these large corporations like Lilly, for example, wants to move in, put a big pharmaceutical manufacturing site there. This thing requires oodles of water. Okay, well, now we got to pump water to the site, and the IEDC folks got the great idea to take water from Wabash River aquifers near you up there in Tippecanoe County, and we're going to pipe it, 25 miles or however long it is, down to Lebanon, and millions of gallons a day. You were one of the folks who were there right at ground zero pushing against that plan. Can you sort of refresh folks, tell us what happened there, what the plan was, how you pushed back against it, and ultimately prevailed, at least for the time being?
Absolutely. I'd love to tell that story again. I first learned about it in the summer. I think it was... I think it was 2023. I have to refresh my memory, but in any case, I had not heard about it. There was a public meeting, and when I first heard about it, I thought this was bad for so many reasons. Again, using my scientific background, they were going to build a multi-billion-dollar pipeline to transfer this water from one watershed to another, from aquifers. These aquifers were not too distant from like a toxic waste dump. And if you pump out the water from those aquifers, then you would suck the toxins into the aquifers and into the Wabash potentially. It was wrong for so many different reasons. Now, there's a dispute as to whether they decided to site it in Lebanon not knowing that there wasn't any water there, or whether they knew and they were just arrogant enough to think, well, we'll solve the water problem later. Water problem later. And so they looked towards these, and they did it completely in secrecy. They bought up the land near Lebanon. Now it's been annexed to Lebanon, in secret. They planned the pipeline in secret. They were buying up land near the aquifers in secret. Everything was done. There was no transparency, no accountability. And the state legislature made this all possible. So how did they do that? Originally, the IEDC was set up sort of to replace the Department of Commerce. It was set up by Mitch Daniels. And the original purpose was to recruit companies to come to Indiana. Sounds like a fine idea. But over the course of time, they were given, for example, the power to give what are in essence tax abatements to data centers. And they were given the ability to be a real estate corporation. And they were given the ability to be a tax collecting organization back in, I believe, 2022. And so they had mission creep, and all of these things just increased their power and decreased the transparency and accountability. So when I learned about this initially, I said, I don't know if there's anything I can actually do about it. I asked, and everybody said, oh, you as a city councilor, nothing, it's up to the state legislature. And the message I got most often was, it's a done deal. So I thought about it for a couple months, assuming, I was being informed correctly. And then I said, no, I don't accept it. And so I spoke out at a meeting. There's a whole story involving the movie Chinatown and my pretending to be Jack Nicholson in the movie, but I'll spare you that. But I when I did that, it attracted a lot of attention. I was getting 5, 6 texts, email, phone calls a day about this. So I thought, okay, it's not just me. There were a lot of people who were concerned about this. People who wanted to know, what can I do? So the next meeting, I decided to have a resolution. I found a co-sponsor with me saying that we were opposed to this. It passed unanimously, and it became the template for, I think, maybe 18 other resolutions around the state, including Bloomington, as it happened, but mostly communities that were associated with the Wabash River. And it didn't matter whether the county commissioners were all Republican. This was a bipartisan, this issue united people across the political spectrum in a way that no issue has united people in Tippecanoe County for decades. And so because, well, I was getting positive response with the resolution, I thought what we need is an organization dedicated to stopping the water steal. And that's what I called it. It was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I thought it was an effective title. And once again, the people who belonged to that organization were across the political spectrum, but we weren't alone. There was a very active Facebook page, a Facebook group. There was a We the People group based in Lafayette. There were people in Boone County, and we united to stop the water steal. Now, I do have to say that I think without the Stop the Water Steal movement, we would not have been successful. We really did play a critical role in stopping it, and it wasn't, any state legislator who did this. The legislation didn't stop it. What stopped it was the political pressure that our group and our allies applied, and the amount of media attention that we were able to create. And we eventually stopped the water steal, so they had to look somewhere else. It's also likely the biggest draw of water would probably be for a semiconductor manufacturing plant. Neither Lilly nor data centers are as water intensive as a semiconductor plant. They're still water intensive. I'm not trying to diminish that, but we were talking about plants, speaking of up to 100 million gallons of water a day being piped through this pipeline. So they stopped because of the opposition in Tippecanoe County. We stopped that, and then they did look towards Eagle Creek. And I've communicated with people who are from Eagle Creek who are trying to oppose this. And they're interested in how are we successful, right? It's not often that these grassroots organizations are be able to effectuate change, but we did. And so I think it's a model, and it's something that I would embrace as state senator. And that is, we can't believe that government is just our representatives. Government, I believe in we the people. I think that it's extremely important for individuals, residents, voters to organize to protect their common interests. And one of those common interests, again, unites people across the political spectrum, is home rule, and the idea that we should be able to make our own laws for our own communities, not have state preemption, which occurs over and over and over again whenever we try to achieve anything, for example, about the environment, or as it happens, puppy mills. The state legislature, and it's Republican Party, they're in charge here, will listen to the lobbyists and listen to the industries and overrule home rule. So this is a constant problem, and we face it. And it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican government or a Democratic local government. We face this issue of state preemption and state imposition, and that's what's happening with these data centers. It's happening at the state level, and they are pushing it against community interests. And this is something that is, again, unites people across the political spectrum. And I'm happy to be a voice that is opposing the IEDC, the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. I think that the revelations about it that have occurred, for example, with the IndyStar's articles on the Three Kings, really says that the IEDC can't be reformed. I've been advocating, initially for reformation, for taking away its tax collecting ability, for example. But it is gone beyond that. The level of corruption in the IEDC is so extensive, it can't be remedied. And I'm actually have called for its abolition. And if it is abolished, all of the chose the wrong room. All of the incentives that are being provided for these corporations to come in with their water-intensive industries to over community objections, that'll disappear. I mean, people really need to understand that this is not a conspiracy theory. There's nothing hidden about this. The IEDC is behind these projects, and it's the tax abatements, tax incentives that are driving these anti-community operations. So we really have to approach the issue from the perspective of the IEDC.
Yeah, and the whole reason for recruiting these companies to come to Indiana theoretically is that they're going to come do business here and pay taxes here, but then you have these tax abatements like, oh no, actually you don't need to pay taxes here. We'll have your employees pay taxes or something after they you attract a workforce here with your company. Put the burden on the working people, not the company actually. But I want to talk about the water issue around the IEDC specifically. Your community, you organized, you were a major part of that. You did a great job pushing back, say no, not here. Well, it doesn't solve the thirst of the Leap district for water, so they look elsewhere, right? And they sort of settle on the Eagle Creek Reservoir in Indianapolis on the northwest side there. And to my understanding, they're proceeding with that. No shovels are in the grounds yet, but the Indianapolis city councilors are bipartisan. Are uniting against this thing. I want to say 21 of the 25 city county councilors there signed a letter against this. You spoke of the secrecy that goes on with this thing. Sort of same thing happened there. IEDC, LEAP, the Lebanon utilities there were negotiating with Citizens Energy, who I guess is in charge of the reservoir, to my understanding, to do this water deal. But before any of the people in the area knew about it, sort of similar thing that they've done across the state, in your area, in other areas with these data centers, very secretive. People find out, they come together, they protest. What do the people in the Eagle Creek area need to know from you and your successes there in Tippecanoe County to push back against this thing to protect their water source?
So two points I want to make. The first one is that I have been informed by good sources that the failure of taking the water from these aquifers associated with the Wabash River led to a semiconductor company that was considering coming to Leap Lebanon. They're not coming. So I don't have all the inside information, but it seems as if you make enough noise, and that's my second point, you make enough noise, you can achieve change. You have to keep on telling yourself, Don't let the people who say it's a done deal, there's nothing you can do about it, win. If you do nothing, you're definitely going to lose. I can't guarantee an outcome. I didn't guarantee an outcome, stop the water steal, but we achieved that result. So I tell them, you have to organize, you have to write, not just to your legislators, but to all the legislators in the and all the candidates, as it happens, that are running for legislative offices. You have to make them aware of these issues. You have to unite with other groups around the state that are dealing with these same issues. And you have to see the larger issue. And as I said, the larger issue is the IEDC. They are behind all of these community disrupting projects. And as soon as people realize that, they can understand that they have a common thing. It's data centers here, it's carbon sequestration there, it's massive amounts of water here. It's all one. It's all one process, and it's the IEDC that unites all of them. And if you focus on that and you focus on realizing that that is where you need to direct your activities, you can succeed. You can't succeed if you are just focused on the one issue. And that's part of what when we dealt with Stop the Water Steal and these other organizations. They weren't all necessarily just about the water. Some of them were, but some of them were also what the transformation that was happening in Boone County. But you unite people with common issues, and then you're much more powerful than just trying to work on your own individual data center, right? You may even succeed there, but you have to see the larger issue and support those people who can potentially represent you in the state legislature, who see that, who aren't just there, to defend their particular communities, but to see their community, the challenges that their communities face as emblematic of the larger statewide issues.
Yeah, otherwise you're just playing whack-a-mole, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They'll get pushed out of one community, they'll go find another one that maybe isn't as organized, is maybe disadvantaged, can't push back. That's why they pick these predominantly black neighborhoods in Indianapolis to put some of these data centers. That's why they pick rural communities to put some of these other data centers. It's the same thing. And to your point you mentioned earlier, it unites people across those divides. Where you normally think people don't get along, that urban-rural divide especially is very pronounced in our country right now.
If I could just
something that unites folks.
If I could just add, the current state legislature, the two groups that you singled out are both treated with disrespect by the state legislature. It's a peculiar thing that we think of our rural areas as supporting the Republican agenda, but they haven't been treated well by the supermajority. Their interests are not being taken into account. They are falling farther behind in the digital divide. Both those communities are falling farther behind in the digital divide. Their economic, their health needs are not being addressed, and you're exactly. And on top of that, they're just using these areas for corporate playgrounds. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did the fact that you mentioned those two groups, I think is very important, because they are both being treated disrespectfully by the supermajorities right now.
Absolutely, they take these folks' votes for granted. Especially the Republicans take their rural voters for granted. And, if you look at in Indianapolis, that's maybe not the IEDC. The city of Indianapolis has their own little economic development corporation there that recruits things like that Metro Blocks data center in Indianapolis. And Mayor Hogsett and those corporate Democrats, they take their black voters for granted in the same way. And now I want to talk about. Let me play devil's advocate here there for just a second, because maybe I don't fully understand exactly how all of this works. Governor Braun says the concern about the water usage at these developments is misconstrued, that they don't use nearly as much water as people think. The water gets used, it gets, treated, and it gets put back into the reservoir. It's not like when you hear, oh, they're going to use X million gallons a day, like that water just doesn't get sucked up and go nowhere. It gets used and it gets put back into the system. I mean, listen, we do the same thing with like human waste and raw sewage. It goes to the treatment plant, it gets treated, the water goes back into the lake eventually, and we don't think anything of that. Why is this different?
So, great question. First thing is that the sanitation systems that we've developed have been developed over hundreds of years, and we understand that we understand the microbiology that's involved there. But even that system, we are facing issues with microplastics and PFAS, where we're facing these chemical. So there are two parts. There's microbiological. That's the what we normally think of. But there's also chemical interest, and it turns out it's more difficult to deal with some of those chemical insults to our water supply. And when we're talking about manufacturing and so on, that's the real issue. And we don't have a fully developed. We're developing it. I'm not saying that it's all absolutely unsafe and we can't deal with it, but it's an evolving problem, because as we have, I'll just mention, we talk about semiconductor manufacturing. There are all sorts of proprietary processes involving proprietary chemicals that we don't even know about, and it's we to try to deal with them when we're trying to detoxify and return the water is not straightforward. And with the data centers, there are possibilities for data centers, for example, to recycle their own water and do that, but that's not a requirement, and many of them don't do that. It's not a closed system for using the water. And now that they say, oh, it's okay now, but what they were going to do in our case, which they told us was okay, was transferring a huge amount of water from one watershed to another. And there is no ecologist, there's no scientist who tells you that that's the right thing to do, that that's a safe process to engage in. And so now that they're trying to reassure, oh, it's going to come, it's going to go back, I don't think that people should be fully reassured. I'm not trying to, again, scare anyone, but these it's the issue, the larger issue is, once again, why would you cite these centers and these water consuming activities in places without the water? So you have to take them from somewhere else, potentially damaging those other environmental areas. And it's an example of poor planning or arrogant planning, and that's really what concerns me as someone who wants to participate in the state processes. I'm highly concerned about this, this arrogance, either lack of planning or inconsiderateness towards local communities. I'll just mention, the person who was in charge of the IEDC back when they were talking about transferring the water from the aquifers associated with the Wabash River said, as long as there's water in the Great Lakes, there's no problem with taking this water. The Great Lakes are not the source of the waters of the Wabash River. They are not connected to the Wabash River. So this is the sort of thinking that went into that. And I'm concerned always, if this is, if the people in charge have this sort of dismissive attitude towards science and geography and geology and communities, I don't think that we should trust them to make these sorts of decisions for us. So again, I'm not an alarmist that you can never transfer water and that the water is definitely going to be poisoned and so on. But the lack of transparency from both the government agencies and the corporations is something that's concerning. Let's talk about the Wabash River. I hope we have time to do that. I cross a bridge. It's called the Harrison Bridge, connects West Lafayette and Lafayette. I walk across it once a week, once every other week, something like that. There are bald eagles now perching over the Wabash River. They were gone. I hadn't seen them. I've been at West Lafayette 30 years. They've only been there in comparatively recent past. Why is that? It's because the Wabash River was contaminated with, pesticides and, of course, industrial waste. It was not a clean river. The fish were sick. I was still not necessarily advocating eating the fish from the Wabash River, but it's so much cleaner than it was in the past. And, you had DDT, which practically eliminated the American bald eagle, our national symbol. And again, corporations assured us that these things were safe, and it took people revealing the problems and community action to change things. And so you cannot just rely on what the corporations are telling you. And I don't think the IEDC actually has the expertise to evaluate these issues. And you need to have some people in government. I'm not saying that every single person in the state legislature needs to be a scientist, but we need one, there who can be the person in the room who can actually evaluate it, and not rely on what lobbyists on one side or the other are saying, but to really understand and to ask the right questions and to be able to contact the right people. That's one of the great things about the Stop the Water Steal movement, is that we had all of these experts that we could rely on, who joined, or who I'm still in contact with a number of them, who we can rely on to help us understand what are the data that the government is generating, that the corporations are generating, and so on. And I have those contacts, and I can also, understand what I'm being told by the experts in the evaluation. I don't think that that's a widespread capacity among members of the state legislature. They have their own areas of expertise, but for many of these issues, and I often say that many of the issues that face us as a society have a scientific or technological basis. I'm the first person to admit they don't necessarily have a scientific or technological solution, but you need to understand the problem on a first-hand basis. And I believe that I would be one of the few members of the legislature. And these issues go from agriculture and new genetic engineering techniques to healthcare, to infectious diseases, to just our healthcare infrastructure, dealing with the issues with child mortality in our state. You need to be able to understand numbers. You need to be able to understand what the science actually tell us, and that's something that I can bring to the role.
There's just this move fast and break things mentality. I think in the business class, it's like, and the hubris, like, whatever, we're just going to go ahead and do this. If it causes problems, we'll figure it out later. It's fine. We got this. It'll be fine. And sometimes it's not fine with the DDT in the river, and it takes decades to clean up. Right? God, and they don't think ahead of time about all of the things that could go wrong. It's, we got to get this thing now. The investors need their return now. We got to get shovels in the ground. Let's get going. We'll deal with the consequences later, or not. You'll deal with the consequences later. We'll be long gone with our money. So to that effect, we mentioned the Stop the Water Steal movement. You guys push the IEDC pipeline out of your community, protected those aquifers. Not so fast, my friend. So I guess there's a semiconductor development planned for West Lafayette, smack dab in the middle of a residential neighborhood on top of it all. And, you mentioned this other semiconductor plant that was eyeballing the LEAP district, and they dipped out because they couldn't get their water. These things are a water intensive process. This SK Hynix development in West Lafayette, gonna need water. Where are they eyeballing? Those same aquifers.
So, few facts about this. One is that this is what's called a packaging plant. It is less water intense. Packaging doesn't mean that they're just adding, plastic wrap to the chips. It's actually a formal chemical intensive process. It does use a substantial amount of water. The amount of water is more than the total sum of the consumer use of water in West Lafayette. So it's a substantial amount of water, nowhere near what we were talking about with the LEAP pipeline. We had what was presented to us at City Council was a rezoning issue, and this was one of the longest sessions we've ever had. It went to at least past 1 a.m, though there was overwhelming community opposition to the rezoning when the corporation, which was being completely not transparent, hadn't communicated with the city council at all. When they were asked what chemicals are involved, they said copper and alcohol. I happen to know enough about the process to know that that's a totally inadequate answer. But that's the arrogance with which they treated us. I was one of the people who I was vocal in my opposition to the rezoning. I was one of the people who voted against it. It went forward. In this particular case, the Area Plan Commission had voted against the rezoning. And this was, in my recollection, the first time that an APC recommendation to reject something had been overturned by the city council. Sometimes the APC has said we should go forward with something, and the community says, no, I don't, we don't think so. But I'd never seen an example where the APC had said no, and we went ahead and said yes. There are some lawsuits here, but the issue with the SK Hynix and its being, surrounded by this area being surrounded by residential neighborhoods is once again can be traced to the IEDC and its ally, the Purdue Research Foundation. So the Purdue Research Foundation owned the land that was being rezoned and where SK Hynix was going to be. There's plenty of land in Tippecanoe County. There's lots of land in Tippecanoe County, and it would be much more suitable for having a industrial development than surrounded by residential areas. And this was a rezoning from a residential area to a industrial area. That was the rezoning that occurred. But it was cited there because PRF wanted to make the money off of the project. So instead of it being some other place in the county, there would have been far less opposition. They had to have it there, creating a potential hazard, certainly noise, traffic, and so on for the residential community. They had to have it there because PRF wanted to make the money off of it. There was an article referred to the corruption in the IEDC. And there's an article, more than one article, in the Indianapolis Star about what the three people called the Three Kings. and they're self-dealing. And it's incredible article. And my favorite part is that one of these three kings writes a letter from the organization that he represents about money to himself at the IEDC, requesting funds. And we're talking about that things associated with these three kings. And they were part of the IEDC, but they had other corporations outside that they were associated with. It's $180 million was directed by these three kings to corporations with which they are associated. One of them called Chad Pittman, and I encourage everybody to actually look up. I don't trust what other people tell me. I don't think you should necessarily trust me on this particular part. I think you'll find that I'm telling you the truth. But Chad Pittman was associated with the IEDC, and that now he's the head of the Purdue Research Foundation. So this is all a club. This is all
door.
What?
Oh, a revolving door. Yeah.
It's a revolving door, and it's public monies serving private interests, and private interests of those people who are connected to the people in charge. And it's hard for me to understand how Purdue Research Foundation continue to be run by somebody after what was revealed in those articles about the three kings. So, but that's why it's there. It's not because it's the best place for this semiconductor manufacturing plant. It's because PRF wanted to make money off the project, and I don't think that that's how our semi-private, semi-public organizations should operate. And I don't think that that's a justification for citing it there. And I don't think that we should have these secret deals that are to the benefit of the people that are supposed to be making decisions for the good of the people of Indiana and for the good of Purdue University.
And it's not just that there's this the private gain to be had from these public-private partnerships. There's also, if you want to get conspiratorial, it goes even bigger than that, right? There is a military-industrial complex kind of component to this thing. This is a semiconductor plant. I know the part of the Chips and Science Act was reshoring semiconductor manufacturing to get it away from China, to get it away from Taiwan for defense purposes. And Purdue is very much part of that milieu. You've got the Applied Research Institute there, the connected to IU, and the Crane Naval Warfare Center down there as well. It's a big club to what you said, and it is a secretive military industrial club as well.
It's true. The industries that PRF has been recruiting to their lands are mostly associated with the military. You probably think that Rolls-Royce and Saab make cars. They don't. They sold off those names long ago. They make military equipment mostly associated with aircraft engines. Now, I have to say it's important for us to have a military that could potentially defend American interests. I'm not sure that we always employ the military for positive things, but it would be a bit of an abandonment of our international obligations not to have any military. And I want American soldiers to have the best equipment possible. The problem is, in this case, that we are a university and we're supposed to be doing things in a open and transparent fashion. We're supposed to be doing things for the public good. And when everything is done in secrecy and we have to enter into all these deals specifically, I mean, again, we could be recruiting all sorts of corporations to the Purdue Research Foundation, but we focused almost exclusively on military contractors. So it suggests a lack of balance, and a lack of understanding, what the community would be potentially interested in and what could be for the greater good. There are many, many other industries that could potentially be brought here, and we've completely focused on these military companies. And there's a lot to be said. Rolls-Royce had the biggest bribery scandal in the UK, and US was involved as well. We are, and again, these corporations were brought in with tax abatements, and they're not, the amount of money being paid in these tax abatements is completely out of proportion to what is true elsewhere around the country. I think tax abatements in general are not a good public policy, but we were paying outrageous amounts in tax abatements to these corporations, and they were coming anyway. This is the most bizarre part of that, is that the PRF wanted them so much, and Mitch Daniels, when he was president, he's the once and future president. He wanted them to come so desperately, and they were going to come anyway, but we still gave them tax abatement, the money that they didn't need. And again, if we're talking about economic development, I think there would be a much better bang for the buck and much better productive use if we were investing in businesses that already exist here and entrepreneurs that are here in Indiana, right? Instead of trying to bring in international corporations that don't necessarily have the best history associated with them. So I was the vocal opponent of all of these as well. I was not successful. And also, when you're talking about tax abatements and all these things that the IEDC is giving out, in so many cases, what is it called? Foxconn in Wisconsin, very famous, not too far away. All this money, government money spent, and it all went bust. And something they've always asked for is clawback provisions in whenever we have the tax abatements. We haven't had them. There are many, many examples of corporations pulling up their stakes before they wind up having to, pay their full sets of taxes. And so I think this is a waste. I think this is corporate welfare. I think this is, lacks accountability, lacks transparency, and I will do what I can to oppose it. But from the state level, it's the IEDC.
It really is, and boy, Doc, we could go on all night about this, and we will revisit this situation for sure, because the development, the giveaways seem to keep coming and coming and coming, and we need fighters like you in important positions of power to help be the people's voice against some of these powerful players. So, Doc, we got to get running here, but before we do, where can people find you? How can they find you online? How can they help your campaign?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So the webpage is davidsandersindiana.com. David Sanders, Indiana, all connected. I have a Facebook page for the Senate District 23. I have an Instagram. My X account is David Sanders Rep. David Sanders Rep at David's. I have a Blue Sky account. I can't remember off the top of my head what is my handle on that, but I'm very easy to find there. I have an Act Blue site. It's pretty easy to find to support my campaign for Senate District 23. I just mentioned two quick things. Number one is, in the primary, in this election, $3 million was spent on ads in which each one of the candidates attacked the others with falsehoods. Okay, their ads were horrific. They were not positive, didn't tell you anything positive about the candidates, and they weren't even true. I mean, I know both of these candidates, and what they were saying about the other one simply isn't true. So they have very large resources, and so I need help here. It turns out that if you look at the numbers, this is one of the most competitive state Senate races against an incumbent. So I could really use support. But the other thing I think everybody needs to be paying attention to is, where are the other candidates? And the candidate that eventually emerges from this 3-vote primary election, where did they get their money from? What's the source of the money that supported their campaigns? I think that people will be surprised by where the money is coming from. And it's coming, for example, from corporations that are trying to promote carbon sequestration in Indiana. I won't accept those sorts of monies. I'm asking for money from the citizens of Indiana to support my campaign, not from corporations that are going to despoil our communities.
Small dollars, real people. That is grassroots. That is the only way to do this thing. Dr. David Sanders, thank you so much for your continued fight, for your efforts to represent the people there in your community in West Lafayette and beyond. We appreciate it. We appreciate your time tonight, and we will talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight on the Who's Left podcast.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's great.
All right, folks, Dr. David Sanders, you can help him. We will link to all his sites there in the show notes, and you will also find links to me in the show notes. I can be found in all the usual places, as you know, on Facebook, Blue Sky, and TikTok at Who's Left, and on Instagram and Threads at whosleft.us. Direct message me any of those places with feedback, tips, ideas, or concerns. Email me directly at scott@whosleft.us. I will be back Sunday in the morning at 10:30 a.m. for Who's Left This Week, Indiana's only unapologetically progressive Sunday morning politics show. Tune in on YouTube, Facebook Live, and of course at progressiveindiana.net. I will discuss the Indiana Democratic Party Convention, which is on Saturday. I hope to see many of you there, as well as all of the rest of the week's top Indiana stories, plus U.S. and international news through a Hoosier lens. My guests this week are Indianapolis activist and community organizer Samantha Douglas, as well as the host of the popular Social Society YouTube show, Brandon Clark. Please join us. So, finally, please forward the show to a friend, have them pass it on to. Please, let's keep building this project and a truly democratic state together, one conversation at a time. Until the next one, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.